Transcription has started. Okay. Um, Recording will begin soon. Yeah. Okay, yeah, it has started. Okay, recording has started. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, welcome to the Garud podcast. This is the first episode of the Garud podcast. We'll just begin like just a short introduction about you. I'll just begin. So my guest here today is Tejas. So Tejas is an A350 pilot, and he flies all around the world for Cathay Pacific, and he's also a former flight instructor. So he has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and he also holds the FAA Gold Seal Flight Instructor Certificate. And Tejas is really passionate about teaching, and he's instructed numerous student pilots up until the final phase of their training. And he has accumulated about 3,000 hours of instructional experience. Tejas also has his own blog and his Instagram page, which I'll link in the description later below. And he frequently posts beautiful pictures of the A350 and all of the places he flies to. And I just wanted to share one thing in common. So both of us are from Mumbai, and that is my hometown. I'm just curious, which part of Mumbai are you from?
Worley.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I've been there numerous times. We can begin. I'm just curious, like, what made you consider a career in aviation, and yeah, how did that begin?
Well, it started when I was a kid. My dad used to work in Muscat, Oman. And as a kid, I used to go with my mom to pick him up and drop him off at the airport. Well, I was really small, but the fact stuck with me that airport is the place where you either meet your loved ones or you say goodbye to them. And that
Mhm.
kind of stuck with me that I would like to be the person who would make families meet or
Mhm.
take people somewhere, and that's where the love started for aviation. So since as a kid, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, I enjoy going to airports as well. Like every time in an airport, I just like the vibe, the atmosphere there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah. So then also like one other question I was like, how did you become an instructor and like how did that happen? Yeah.
So when I finished my training, that was back in 2010. Uh, I only had the minimum hours, and I wasn't happy with just having minimum hours and being, to go for an airline. And also, it was quite difficult at that time because there was not many vacancies to hire fresh pilots. So I said,
Yeah.
well, I'll try and become an instructor because I already was, before I started flying, I already liked to teach. So I have taught
Yeah.
in, before I became an instructor, I've taught in like private tutorials or even university students, even in a university when I finished my engineering. So I always love to teach. I have always also taught about a few things which it's not relevant right now, but so I always love to teach. And then I said, okay, well, if I become an instructor, not only will I gain experience, not only will I become more proficient, but I will also help other people to become pilots. So that was the
Mhm.
main reason I started to get my training as an instructor.
Oh, okay. And like what's your most memorable experience like being an instructor or teaching? Do you have any or
Yeah, there were many instances where I thought I would be gone, uh,
Okay.
but there were also nice instances. There were many because, as I said, I've been an instructor for about 8 or 9 years. So there were many things that happened in between, but there's never, you can't ever say as an instructor that you've seen it all because you've never seen it all. There's something new coming up every time. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have any particular instance where I would say was most memorable as such as instructor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there were plenty of them, plenty of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, instructors I've noticed like always have they try to share like certain experiences they've had. Like I know this one instructor like he used to always like give say these certain sayings, which still I remember. But um, and so the next question kind of I just had was like, what was the first airline you ever? Which was the first airline you ever worked for?
That will be Cathay Pacific. That's my first airline.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I see. I see. And what was the recruitment process for that? Like, how rigorous was it before you
It
joined?
was, well, it was and it is one of the most toughest, I would say, the process to get in. Not that
Yeah.
it's impermeable, but it's definitely one of the toughest ones. It was a 2 day process. The first day started off, if I remember right, yeah, the first day started off with a group discussion. We were five of us, and we were given a task. And the goal or the objective of that task is not to find a solution, but rather to see how we work as a team. Because as you know, flying an airline, flying for an airline, or flying an aircraft which is multi-crew certified, you need to be able to work as a team and not just say, okay, this is my office and I'm going to work just by myself. So the objective of that group discussion was to see if you can work in a team. That
Yeah.
was the first thing that we did on the first day, the group discussion. After that, we were taken for a written exam, which was also, I mean, it's called a written exam, but it's on the computer. Multiple choice questions, that, as most of the pilot tests are. It's a multiple choice question, ATPL level.
Yeah.
Uh, After that, we were taken for a simulator check. So my check was on the 777. These guys, the one who check you on the 777 or 747 or whatever it is, are not looking for if you can fly the jet, but they're looking for if you know the basic principles of flying, and if you know the
Yeah.
differences what you will encounter when you're flying a propeller aircraft, or a turboprop aircraft and a jet aircraft. So the basic task was for us was on the jet to take off, no autopilot, level off at a traffic pattern altitude 1500, come back on the downwind, and then join the ILS and come back and land. That was straightforward. That was the only thing they were looking for. While you were doing that, they would be looking at how you handle the aircraft. Are you trimming properly? Are you using the basic principles, pitch, power, attitude, your communication, your understanding of ATC instructions, mm, and basic common sense when you're flying, basic airmanship skills. Nothing more
Okay.
than that. Nothing. You don't have to know the systems of the 777. Don't have to know how it works, what happens, and if you set these flaps and what happens. Nothing. The examiner. There were two examiners. One was sitting on the left seat as the captain. One was sitting at the back observing. And the observing and the person in the left seat were quite helpful in giving you whatever you need. You want a checklist, they'll provide it to you. They want you to get the flaps down, the gear down, whatever it is. They were quite open and frank with you. So that was the simulator ride. That was the end of the first day, and the second day it started off with I'm sorry. Yes, that was second day. Yes, correct. On the second day, we had a personal interview with the HR manager. After that was the technical interview. Technical interview was based on your previous experience. So since I was a flight instructor, they asked me what airplanes I'd flown, and then they started asking me questions about my airplanes in general. So how would you handle a particular emergency? How does the fuel system work? And then they asked me what was my favorite aircraft and how does a jet engine work, so on, basic questions. If I was hired, would I be able to cope up with the jet training advanced systems? Um, Questions pertaining to that, ATPL level questions. After that was the medical check, basically just a pilot medical for a class one. Because of course, if you've passed all through that, and then you should be able to medically also be fit for the job. So they did the medical as well, and that was the end of day two. So to tell you in all honesty, on the first day we were five people, and of the five people on the second day there was only me and that's one person for the next day. So all the four were taken off, and they were also pilots who've been flying for a long time. So it's a very rigorous process. Before me, on the previous batch, there were 15 on the first day and zero on the second day.
Okay.
So they take the
Yeah.
hiring
Yeah.
very seriously because in Cathay, it's such a major airline like most of the other major airlines, but because when they
Mm.
hire, they don't have much time to sit with you and start training like a
Yeah.
basic zero pilot, you know. So they really want to see if you can work yourself up through the
Mm.
process, yeah, even after you're hired. It's just like I would say comparable to like IIT in India, where
Yeah.
not only just that you got in, but once you get in, you have to build up your
Yeah.
own progress, you know.
Yeah. 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 I've even heard like, in some of the Middle Eastern carriers where the hiring process is like it is quite rigorous. So,
Yes, it
um,
is.
yeah.
Yes. I was previously selected. I was going to work when I was in the Middle East, working as a flight instructor. I had applied and I did get selected for Fly Dubai. I'm not sure if you know that
Mm.
airline.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a small sister airline for Emirates. Yeah.
Mhm.
So their process was not so rigorous, but yes, it was also quite comparable. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so you're flying the A350 currently, but have there been any other jet aircraft you've flown before, or is this like the first major jetliner you've flown?
Yeah, I no,
Sure.
I was rated on the 737,
Yeah.
excuse me, 737 NG for Fly Dubai, but I never got a chance to fly because then I got an opportunity with Cathay, so I just jumped over to
Oh,
Cathay because it's a
yeah.
major airline.
Yeah. 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 And so we talked about you being a flight instructor, but I'm just curious, do you have like when you were a student pilot, do you have like any memorable experiences? And like I just know, like there are certain flying schools on Instagram where they post videos of like instructors dumping water on cadets after their first solo. Do you have like any memories like that from flying school?
No, my flight
Mm.
school, when we used to solo, we didn't have any of that. Now my flight school has
Mm.
started doing something similar where they ring a bell or something. But when I did my solo, no, there was nothing like that. All you got was congratulations. That was it,
Oh, okay.
and a certificate.
Mm.
Um, to be honest, again, for me, I never looked at my solo as my target or my goal, as most
Mm.
people would do. My goal was to complete my training as soon as possible and start
Yeah.
flying
Mm.
passengers or start flying as an instructor. So,
Mm.
yes, it was a big achievement for me. I still remember the day when I soloed, but that was not the ultimate goal for me. I
Okay.
soloed on a
Okay.
Sunday. I remember that in the Cessna 172 at
Mm.
Ormond Beach in Florida.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 I mean, Florida is like kind of like a hot spot for student pilots for sure. So, yeah.
Yes, it is about, I think about 90 to 95% of the entire US training happens in Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I just want to ask you, like, because you're a cafe pilot, so you're a very much an international pilot. So, like, I just had a weird question, and this is something like many my family members are also curious to know is like, how do you adjust your sleep cycle? Like, one day you might be in LA, another day you might be in Brisbane, then you might be in Mumbai, and then you'll be back home in Hong Kong. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's quite hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the cons of being an international pilot.
Mm.
It's not easy. Definitely, it's not easy. There's no hard and fast rule what I follow, but the only thing that I or most of the pilots that we do long haul flying is get as much rest as we can, either
Yeah.
on in flight or when we are on the ground. Depends now. Say, let's say I'm flying to LA or flying to New York. If it's a short layover, for example, if it's just 24 hours or 30 hours or less than 2 days, less than two local days in New York, then I would stick to my Hong Kong time and try to get
Yeah.
up and sleep at the same usual times that I would do in Hong Kong, which is my base, which is my body
Yeah.
clock. If it is more than 2 days, then I would rather probably try to shift to the local time and then try to get accustomed to the local time zone. They're trying to wake up earlier or sleeping later or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's always a juggle and it's always a hassle. When I'm back in
Yeah.
Hong Kong after this long haul flying, at least takes me 2 days to recover. So I'm almost sleeping most of the time. So the basic goal is, or the
Yeah.
basic Gist of it is just get as much rest as you can when you can. So that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
It
I know
does take
one
a toll
pilot
on you.
yeah, yeah. I know one pilot in India, and like sometimes he comes back home at 4 a.m. or something, and his sleep schedule is messed up. It
Yes.
is something, yeah, something difficult for pilots for sure.
It
Yeah.
is. I mean, because most of the flights that we operate from here to the US and to Europe are long haul flying flights, and they depart at around midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. So you fly through the night, and because if you're going to the US, you're flying through the night, and its body clock is about 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., and that's when the sun starts to come over the horizon. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a bit of a yeah, that's the con. But then depends how much you love it. If you do love it, if you really have a passion for it, then
Yeah.
that's nothing
Yeah.
to be worried of.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. So the next thing I just kind of wanted to talk about was like the ILS system, which you briefly mentioned in when you were training at Cafe. So in my opinion, this is like the most fascinating piece of technology because I mean, obviously the pilots are manipulating the controls of the aircraft till the very end, but it still enables pilots to see in zero visibility. And I'll just briefly talk about the ILS system because just for some of our viewers who don't know, so there's like three specific categories. You have category one, category two, and category three. And category three is where the pilot's visibility is like completely obscured and they have no visibility of the runway almost. And I'm just curious to know what you think about the system and if at all there are any limitations to it or how it could be improved. And when was the last time you performed an ILS landing with Cat 3A or Cat 3B conditions?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best systems there. It's quite reliable. Um, Most of the major airports have the Cat 3 A, B, or C even. Um, it's been I mean, I think I can't remember really, but it was developed quite a long time ago, and it's been the same system. Nothing has changed so far in its operational aspects of the system. Um, I perform well. I'm not qualified to land in low visibility conditions on the 350. So
Okay.
I haven't performed. I've done in the simulator, but not in the real life. So I can't comment on how it
Sure.
feels to land on it. I've seen it. I've been in the back seat and I've seen landing in a 3B situation, which was in Madrid, 2019. After that, I haven't seen any myself. I mean, I haven't been in the seat to land myself as a Cat 3 landing.
Yeah.
They are developing um, a GPS system, which is more reliable. It is still not certified for 3B as such, or 3A for that matter, but it will be more precise, and that's the future. ILS will be also gone in the next, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years, and which will be
Yeah.
replaced by the GPS systems.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure, but like I think in India, I'm just guessing, like, because usually when I fly, I'm just in the passenger seat. But like, I think in places like Amritsar, Delhi, where sometimes the visibility is very, very low, you need to
That's
use that.
correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Most of the
Mm,
landings, well, it's sad because it's environmentally or atmospherically very bad.
mm,
There's a lot
yeah.
of smog in cities like Mumbai and Delhi. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of almost every time we fly over India, the meter in Mumbai, Delhi is FU, which is fumes. So it's terribly bad situation when we're coming to land. It's almost always Cat 2 or Cat 3A landing there.
Yeah. 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 And so, like about ILS, like many countries are trying to develop their own system. Like in India as well, ISRO has been trying to develop the Gagan ILS system, and I think it can be used in like smaller and more rural airports. Just to help them assist pilots in like terrain constrained approaches. Like, could you just maybe highlight like why is ILS so important? Like, why do pilots really need the system? Like,
Okay, so if you can't
yeah,
see something For example, for us,
Oh,
for as pilots, we need to
mm,
see the runway. If you don't see the
yeah,
runway, you don't know how far you are and how high or low you are with respect to that runway.
yeah,
More to that, add to it, if you see a runway and there's obstacles in between, so now you need to know how much further vertically should you be so that you're
yeah,
separated from the obstacle when you're coming down. So if you don't see a runway, you need to have some kind of a guidance inside the flight deck to guide you to the runway.
mhm,
So the ILS gives you a lateral guidance. It tells you if you're left of the runway. If this is a runway here, it tells you if you're left or right of the runway, and also tells you
mm,
if you're high or low with respect to the normal path that you will be taking to the runway. Now, the ILS can go only up to a certain distance from the runway. It can't really extend further out. So it goes to a certain distance. So once you're at that distance, you can start tracking that system and you can know the system will tell you if you're left of the runway or right of the runway or if you're high or below. And then you can use your instruments to center your position and then follow the track all the way down to the runway. So that's why an ILS is important,
okay,
especially when you don't see a runway.
okay, okay. And yeah, so I'll and so the next thing I just kind of wanted to talk about was like the use of artificial intelligence in this field. So now it is sad, but like Boeing has faced like a lot of criticism over its MCAS system since those two crashes, and that has kind of delayed the induction of the or introduction of the Boeing 777X and the 737 Max into service. I think Cathay itself has placed a few orders for the 777X, I think. Um, and like even Gulfstream has developed a very futuristic system for its airplanes where like if the pilot initiates the ignition system, the aircraft automatically powers like the navigation lights, I think, and the auxiliary fuel pump system. And like what do you think about that? Like how do you think AI is gonna affect aviation and like since it's being like so vigorously integrated in like the avionics systems, what does that mean to you?
As with everything, everything has its pros and cons and the advantages and
Yeah,
disadvantages. Um, Look, I mean, when aviation started, it was not so busy. There were not many airports. There were not many airplanes.
yeah,
So there was not such a need to build an AI system. Um,
yeah,
Necessity, as I always say, I love this quote, necessity is the mother of invention. So when there's a need, that's when an invention happens. So
yeah,
as travel progress and is progressing, planes are increasing, the number of planes in the sky, the number of planes at the airport are increasing. A lot of distractions have also increased with pilots. So
yeah,
people think flying an airline or flying a big jet is much easier because you're sitting in an air-conditioned
yeah,
room. Yes, that's true. I don't deny the fact it is much easier, but there's also distractions, and that's what makes the job harder. There's so much distractions that if your mind gets out of focus for even a minute, and when it's critical time, it, a
yeah,
big mistake can happen. I wouldn't say exactly, I can't pinpoint to what, but I believe me on that a small distraction can lead to a big mistake. And
yeah,
that's why this AI is coming into pictures to avoid these distractions, to take the smaller task away from the pilot so the pilot can have a mental model and focus on the bigger task, the big picture ahead of him. So I think, yes, the AI is helpful, but it can have its disadvantages wherein it can take control from you. Um it's a machine after all, it's not a human, it can malfunction.
yeah,
So that can happen with anything for that matter, even if it's a car or a ship or anything else. It's the washing machine in the house is also a little bit AI nowadays.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it's good. It's definitely helpful, but yeah, it has its disadvantages as with anything else.
Yeah, 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 of course. And one other thing, like kind of piece of technology which has been associated with aviation is like 5G. And now, like, all countries, or at least even in India, I mean, the US, obviously, everybody's trying to bring in 5G, but there are obviously like certain concerns that it can affect the altimeter of an airplane. And there are certain companies in the US which have experienced setbacks with launching this system. Do you think, like as a pilot, there are actually concerns with 5G, or is there not like a major concern?
The only problem it's having is I don't know exactly the technicality of those systems, how it works, but the 5G networks are interfering with the radio altimeters, not the actual barometric altimeter, not the one altimeter that we have. The radio altimeters measure the distance between the aircraft and the terrain beneath it. And that is required for Cat 3A, B, and C landings to know
Yeah.
your RA height. So yes, it does interfere with the radio altimeters, and it will only be a concern when the weather is marginally low.
Mhm.
So that's the only concern. Other than that, there's no other reasons to be worried of the 5G systems.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And like, so there's been like obviously the introduction of a lot of new technologies. Like, what kind of direction do you want to see this industry going in? Like, just as a pilot who uses like major jetliners or aircraft every day.
Uh, as we're talking about AI and all this
Mhm.
stuff, Airbus has already started planning on a single pilot jet aircraft.
Yeah.
Um, it will be assisted by I don't know what kind of a computer, but some kind of an AI computer which is going to replace the other pilot. But there's still concerns, because if it's a 15-hour flight and there's only one person flying, it can't be practically or manually possible to fly 15 hours because it's too much work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Even if it's two pilots, relieve one guy and the other guy. What if the one guy or the one pilot who's flying needs to take a restroom break? So let's say he wants to
Mhm.
go use the restroom for about 5 minutes or whatever, 2 minutes. Then who's going to fly the
Mhm.
airplane at that time? And if something happens, where's the human intervention between them? So it's going to take some
Yeah.
time, but well, that's how humans are progressing towards everything is becoming AI. So I don't know what's going to come next. At least for the next 10, 15 years, I'm not sure if anything's going to come
Yeah.
up. But after that, probably there will be AI intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I was reading recently just like like at least the US Air Force is like flew its F-16 fully with an AI system. I mean, that was really cool to see. But for civil aviation, obviously there's like more concerns with like having a single pilot or no pilot at all.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
For me, it's
Yeah.
still, when I see an automated metro at the station, it still
Mm,
surprises me that how come there's no
mm,
person guiding the
mm,
train. So if
yeah.
if if the society is comfortable riding in a metro or a train which doesn't have a driver or a motorman,
Yeah.
then I guess people will
Yeah.
be comfortable flying in airplanes at some point of time.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. Um, and so just like so kind of deviating away from technology now, like so obviously this industry, like within the aviation industry, there is like a lot of fear mongering, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories, like about the disappearance of MH370, or the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but like whenever like some aviation accident happens in general, like what do you take away from it, or like what do you try to learn from it before you go out flying again?
There's a good saying in aviation. Uh, there's a good saying which I learned and I still I told my students and I still keep it in mind. There are
Mm,
old pilots, but not bold pilots.
yeah, yeah,
So you always keep learning in flying. You always learn from others' mistakes. The key is
yeah,
not to make the same mistake who has done
yeah,
it before, whoever has done it before, not to do the same mistake again. That's the only thing that I learned from an accident or an incident, whatever happens. And that's what most of the people do in aviation.
yeah,
If an accident happens, I really don't like the fact that most of the people, I wouldn't say all of them, most of the people start building up theories. Okay, this might have happened. That the problem is you were not there in that situation. You don't know what happened there.
yeah,
You don't know what the pilot was thinking at that point. Definitely, he didn't leave the house saying, "Today I'm going to die." Today I'm going to crash this airplane. He left with the thought that I'm going to take this airplane, I'm going to take these passengers, land them at a safe place, and go home and sleep. He didn't want to die. So I'm sure the person at that point, at that moment, was trying his best to save, trying the best to do whatever he could. So after the research is over, what we can do is basically just to learn what was he thinking, what his thought process was, and what did he miss out on, and what caused it. Mainly, what was the distraction that caused him to deter from what he was supposed to do? Him or her. I'm sorry, I'm not being gender biased here, but that's just a word that I'm
Yeah.
using.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, just learn from others' mistakes. When I was an instructor, and even now, I tell people, even if I'm a 3,000 hour pilot, and if I meet a 300-hour pilot, or that matter, 100-hour pilot, I wouldn't look at to him any less than what I am, because the 300 hours that he has flown is different than the 3,000 hours I have flown. He has seen some different set of conditions. He or she has seen a different set of conditions, different airplanes, different weather, different runway, different everything. He was in a different, or she was in a different mental state when he was flying those 300 hours than I was. So there's always room to learn from others, and you should always be open to learn from the mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. Yeah. I mean, when I was briefly training, like even my instructor said the same thing. Like you may have a 40-hour pilot, you may have a 400-hour pilot, or a 40,000-hour pilot, and as pilots, we're all equals because you don't know what you're gonna face the next day. So,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Once you put on that white shirt and black pants, we're all the same.
yeah, yeah. And so I just had like one last question about safety training in general. So, like pilots or most pilots today may end up having a career where they will never experience any sort of safety related issue, like Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, Gulfstream, or any other manufacturer has so and so designed the aircraft like not to fail. Like most aircraft today have phenomenal safety systems. Like for example, like the A220 has like this inbuilt, I think, emergency descent system, which can automatically be initiated, or it can be initiated on the pilot's input in case of a cabin depressurization. But yet there are accidents which like occasionally do happen, and they kind of shock the aviation community. Like when QF-32 happened, like the engine failure, like that shocked everyone. And like I still deeply admire Captain Richard de Crespigny and his entire team. Like they were able to like safely and efficiently handle that complex emergency. So whenever you're training in the simulator, like what kind of accidents or emergencies do you train for? And like, is there a specific focus that you might have when you're training for emergencies as compared to pilots like 50 or 60 years ago?
Yes, definitely. The situations or scenarios that we train on are something that has occurred previously, or something that might occur. So those will be engine failures, engine fires, cockpit fires, cabin fires, um, emergency descent, as you mentioned, depressurization, rapid depressurization, explosive decompression, smoke in the cockpit, mm, pilot incapacitation. These are the things that have occurred, and there are more chances that these will occur. So these are the situations we train on. But we have to be, we have to realize that when we train for these situations, you know that it's coming. When you're flying in
Yeah,
the trainer, when you're flying in the simulator, you know today you're going to experience an engine failure. Today you're going to experience an engine fire. So you've already briefed the memory items. You
yeah,
already know what's coming ahead of you. But when you're
yeah,
flying, you don't know what's coming next for you, and uh, it probably has never happened to anyone before. So you need to have a presence of mind. You need to rely
yeah,
back on whatever you have learned in the past, whatever emergencies or abnormal situations you have been trained on, then utilize or gain the basic idea of those things, and then apply that knowledge to handle the situation.
yeah,
I'll give
yeah,
you a small situation what happened with me. When I was in the US, I was an instructor on the multi-engine aircraft, the Piper Seneca and the Diamond DA-42. Now, uh, I was not flying on that day. My colleague was flying. He was also a flight instructor. He was flying with his student, and he called me on the company frequency. I was on the ground, and he said, "I would like to talk to Tejas." And I said, "Okay." I got on the frequency. What's happening? So he said, "I've tried everything. I've used the checklist, but the landing gear is not coming down. I've even pulled the manual gear extension. I have done all the checklists, but the gear is not coming down. What do you suggest?" Now, relying on my past experiences, relying on my understanding of the system, I told him to pull out a particular circuit breaker. I don't
Yeah.
remember what it was because it was about 6, 7 years ago. So I told him to pull that circuit breaker out. He pulled the circuit breaker out. It says, "Voila, the gear is down." Well, how did you know that?
Okay.
Well, it's not in the checklist, but you need to know the system. You have to know the working behind the system to know maybe if I do this, that might help. And this is not recommended until and unless you follow all the required
Yeah.
procedures and you have nothing else to do. And now you say, "Well, I've tried everything, I've got nothing else to do. Now I can rely on uh, my understanding of the system, my knowledge of the system, and then I can play around, provided you have done everything else and that has not worked."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these situations and scenarios that we train on are basically what everybody trains on. But when you are flying, situations don't happen, and the plane is not going to tell you, "Okay, in the next 5 minutes my right engine is going to fail and this is going to happen."
Yeah.
And it may fail, but it may not fail the way you practiced in the simulator. I mean, like the 380 incident that you were talking about, it didn't happen like they were trained in the simulator. It was an uncontained failure. There was damage to the system, to the engine, and things were flying off and whatnot. So
Yeah.
things may happen that are not written in the book, and then you have to have your presence of mind and your knowledge, what you have trained in the past
Yeah.
before, and then apply it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was just watching, I don't even remember the name of the show, but like he was saying, it was like the simulator exercise from hell when they when they had their emergency. So yeah, yeah. And so just talking about like continuing to talk about flying. So Kai Tak Airport was like certainly a very challenging airport to land in. Currently, Paro Airport in Bhutan is also a very challenging airport to land in India or like I think a very small number of pilots are authorized to land there. I
Correct.
think even Leh Airport in India is very challenging because it's like at a very high altitude.
Yes.
There's like a lot of surrounding terrain.
Yes.
What do you think kind of constitutes factors towards how difficult the landing is, and what is the most difficult landing you have performed so far?
Yeah. So the factors that make a landing challenging or an approach challenging is the first of all is the terrain, the obstacles around it.
Yeah,
If it's at a
yeah,
high altitude, there definitely will be mountains around it. When there's mountains around it, or if the terrain is high, then you have to be considerate about the density altitude. That's going to be high.
mhm,
If the density altitude is high, your airspeed, approach speed, true airspeed is going to be high. So now you have to be considering considerable about the landing distance. And also, when you're at high terrain, there's mountains around, the winds are going to be shifting. So that's going to be
yeah,
a big challenge. So now, talking about, say, for example, Katak or Paro in Bhutan, uh, because of the terrain, not only is the path curved, but with those curves, you got to deal with the winds. So now you got to be thinking about how much should I bank, how much should my
yeah,
airspeed be, what should be my power settings, those kind of things that make the landing challenging. It's definitely not saying is that it's impossible, but the reason
yeah,
it's a challenge because you have to have your ultimate focus. You can't be thinking of anything else other than the moment that you are there. Where's the wind coming from? What's my altitude? What's my height above the ground? Those things make the landing challenging. Um, for me, I really don't think I have had any challenging approaches as such because initially I was flying in the US, in Florida.
yeah,
Florida is a very flat terrain, so there's not much terrain concerns there. I've definitely had some crosswind landings, but they're not really, you know, that make an airport challenging as such. When I was flying in Taiwan, Taiwan also has some very high terrain, but the airports were situated outside of the terrain, so that was not a problem. When I was flying in UAE, there was some high terrain away from the airport. So the only concern we had was because when you're flying in UAE, the temperatures were like 45 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
So the aircrafts, the piston aircraft really wouldn't climb. So we would take off from the airport, circle around like a bird and get at an altitude and then get over the airports, over the mountain and then descend down again.
Yeah.
So really, and I haven't encountered any difficult approach as such or a difficult landing as such. As you said, there's very few and rare airports where you can encounter these
Yeah.
situations. So no, I haven't had any approaches that I would call that it's a challenging airport as such.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. And so I just kind of want to talk about like the aircraft you fly, very almost on a daily basis. And like in my opinion, it is like my favorite jet. It's like maybe the most advanced passenger jet manufactured so far. What is your favorite aspect or feature about the Airbus A350?
Uh, just to bring in a point from before, you remember you talked about the emergency descent on the 220.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
also on the 350, so that's
okay,
also one of the
yeah,
systems that we have. For me,
yeah,
I like because I studied engineering before, as you mentioned, so I like the
yeah,
shape of the wing, particularly because it makes it so much more aerodynamic. Now, let me tell you, I'm not sure exactly why and how, but it happens with 350 that it takes quite a long time for us to climb at an altitude
yeah,
compared to a 777 or 787 for that matter. But when we are at an altitude, that wing is so efficient, it burns very less fuel and gives us
yeah,
a Mach cruise speed of 0.85. So that's
okay,
the
yeah,
basic feature that I love about the wing, that um, it's very efficient. It's a very aerodynamic wing.
yeah,
It has something called as a differential flap setting. So when we are in the cruise, once the aircraft is
yeah,
in the cruise, the flaps come out slightly. I think it's a degree or two, and they can be adjusted by itself by the system to adjust the center of gravity to maintain the most aerodynamic profile as much as possible. So that's what I love
okay,
about it.
yeah. And I think I had like watched a video. So like the A350 can fly at a higher altitude than maybe the 777, right? So then as a result of that, you can avoid like storms or bad weather in any
Of
case.
course, of course,
Yeah,
of course, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. We have a cruise altitude of 41,000 or 43,000, depending on the aircraft type. Uh,
mhm,
Yeah, I've been up to 43,000. Uh,
yeah,
Definitely, it's much better because then you can, as you said, avoid most of the weather. But it also depends
yeah,
on if you're heavy or light. If you're really heavy, you can't climb that
yeah,
high.
yeah, yeah.
But it is a factor, yes. If we are light enough, we can go at a higher altitude.
Okay. And one of the coolest features I think about the A350 is like it can fly almost, or like a safety feature is like it can fly, I think, for almost 6 hours just on one engine, and the jet can reach almost a speed of Mach 0.89. So in essence, it just kind of seems like Airbus is trying to, push certain limits of engineering or break certain records. And like, what do you think Airbus is just trying to demonstrate or achieve with the production of this jet?
Uh, well, you see, what every manufacturer is trying to do is get his products sold.
Yeah,
What Airbus is also trying to do is how do I say it? To sell such a product to an operator, whatever airline it is, so that it will help the airline to expand its routes. So
yeah,
for example, flying from Hong Kong to say Seattle in the US,
yeah,
if it
yeah,
was not for these airplanes, we would have to go following the coastline. So from Hong Kong, China, Japan,
yeah,
Russia, and then
yeah,
onwards to Alaska, all those islands, and then come down south over Canada, and then come down to Seattle. Because if there was an emergency, you couldn't be far out over the Pacific, and then you don't have an airport to land. But now, because of
yeah,
these advancements in technology, because the jet can fly, as you said, with a single engine to a further place, now we could just go from Hong Kong straight over the Pacific, crossing Taiwan, over the Pacific, over the Hawaiian Islands, and straight into San Francisco or Seattle, straight off over the Pacific
yeah,
Ocean. Because if there's an emergency, the plane is certified to fly over the water and reach an airport which is 3 hours away, 4 hours away, whatever it is.
Yeah,
So that's what
yeah.
the manufacturer are trying to do, is to build such an airplane that will make it efficient for airliners to operate and to fly newer routes and fly further places by just using the same aircraft rather than making a new aircraft.
Oh, okay. And like just as like a follow-up question, like do you think other manufacturers or Airbus will kind of keep this aircraft as like just as a base of reference or just like a model, or will they maybe just try to innovate from scratch or something? Or
See, before the 350 was made, they were planning on something called as A3XX. That's what the Airbus was planning
yeah,
to do. They tried putting the 330 and the 340 side by side and on top of each other, and that was what came out was the
yeah,
380.
yeah,
So 380 was, as everybody knows, it was not really efficient, and it's not making any much
yes,
money except for Emirates.
mm,
Uh,
yeah,
so the 350, as of now, it does look like it's going to be a reference model. It is going to
yeah,
stay for a while. That's how it looks like, because it's so much more efficient. And the most important cost factor for an airline is the fuel. So if the airplane is saving fuel, um, that's the gold mine for the airline. So I think the 350 is going to be the reference, and then future generations will be probably based on what comes out of the 350.
yeah,
They are
sure.
planning a 350 freighter model. I think Airbus is considering taking orders for the freighters now. I don't know if somebody has posted an order. I don't know yet. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think
mm,
it's going to be a reference model here.
sure. And so like so you're obviously like a wide body pilot, but now one question which I think is looming on everybody's mind. So just as you said, like the A380 was not a very efficient jet, and so I think the last one was manufactured, I think a year or two ago, and now Boeing also developed its final 747. So that program also has been kind of discontinued. And like wide body jets or like wide body jets like the A380 or the 747 just have been criticized for like not being fuel efficient or like just not being logistically efficient because they occupy too much space at airports. So like a lot of airlines have kind of shifted towards adopting narrow body jets like the 737, the A320, A321, the 737 Max, and like there's like recently Air India also like purchased a lot of A320s and 321s.
Mhm, mhm.
And like even some of the Embraer aircraft are being purchased now. Is this like do you just think it's a good transition, or is this like a good transition the airline industry is making just by mostly adopting narrow body jets now?
Yeah, see, that's what the manufacturers are also looking at now, is how the industry is turning or how people are thinking or those lines. I don't think there's going to be any four-engined aircrafts anymore, because people have already had the 747 wash away. The 380 is almost gone now. So it's going to be all twin-engine aircrafts. Um, with a twin engine aircraft, you're limited with the cargo carrying capacity over a distance, and also the number of people you could carry. So definitely it's a bargain between what routes the airline wants to fly and how many people are they expecting to fly on those routes. So talking about Air India, India is a vast country. So we have mainly people flying around the country, so they could
Yeah.
use a narrow body jets or mid-sized jets to fly around India. But if you're talking about going over the seas from India to the US or from India to Europe, then you definitely need a bigger jet. But then you got to be the airline, the operator has to be considering how many or how much number of traffic, how much cargo are they going to actually transport from this place to that place. For example, Cathay, we don't have much of flying in Hong Kong. There's nothing. I mean, Hong Kong is a small place. So most of our flying goes from Hong Kong towards other places like Europe, Australia, and over the Pacific into the US. So we need wider jets and bigger jets that can not only carry much more people, but can also carry more cargo. So in those cases, you would need a bigger jet.
Oh, yeah. So And I just kind of want to also like talk about like global events affecting aviation. So, like over the past 20 years, it has, in my opinion, I think like the industry has been affected by three major events. So, 9/11 obviously resulted in like in a complete transformation of safety protocols, which have to be adopted by all members of the aviation community. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously resulted in all aircraft being grounded for a certain period of time, and the industry suffered a lot of financial losses, and it's slowly starting to recover from it. And lastly, the Russia-Ukraine war has caused a lot of airlines to kind of change their routes or change how they reach a certain destination. So I think Finnair has adopted this like super polar route from Tokyo to Helsinki. I think even Cathay has adopted certain polar routes just to avoid like Russian airspace. And for Finnair, when they're traveling from like Tokyo to Helsinki, it like adds 4 more hours because they want to avoid Russian airspace. How do you think like these events have affected global flight operations on a mass scale, and could the industry be further affected by heightened escalations between the Russian Federation and other countries?
Yes, definitely, it has affected. So think about it this way: a longer route is equivalent to longer time, flying time. Longer flying time
Mm,
means more fuel. More fuels
mm,
equals more money. So it
mm,
all boils down
mm,
to money. It's
mm,
definitely costing the airlines a lot more than what it would have cost without it. Um,
mm,
for us, for Cathay Pacific, flying, avoiding Russian airspace into Europe is a bigger deal because we our routes have increased considerably. I mean, the route distance have increased considerably. So yeah, it
mm.
definitely affects the money, and it may come back to the passengers because the money has to come from somewhere. Um, it's already been, I think, more than a year that the Russian area airspace has been not closed off, but been avoided. Uh, yeah, so it's definitely going to be affecting financially the situation of the airlines and ultimately the passengers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, just on the contrary though, like I've seen the views are probably nice over polar routes for sure.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. We've always flown Polar. In fact, Cathay was the first airline to fly over Polar back in I think 88 or 89. Uh, and that was the inauguration flight coming into the newer Hong Kong airport, which is now the Hong Kong International Airport. So
Mm,
definitely, yeah, the views over there are really nice, and also it's a very a calm weather condition, so there's not many bumps. You can just relax. The only problem we face is with people not having Wi-Fi reception there because, of course, we're over
yeah,
the poles, so there's not many
yeah,
satellites there. So the only complaints
yeah,
we have is why is there no Wi-Fi on the airplane? Well, because we are over the pole.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so, the final like set of questions I just had were kind of about like advancements in aerospace engineering, just because you're an engineer as well. So the big hope for the future is obviously hydrogen. And the recently, I believe there's a company in the UK, I think called Zero Avia, and they're able to perform a net zero emission flight where the engine was powered solely by hydrogen. And obviously, there have been a lot of concerns about the amount of carbon emitted by all aircraft operations. And like, what do you think? Like, what are your thoughts on hydrogen-powered aircraft? And do you think it might become like a primary source of fuel for aircraft in the future? Like, is it a viable solution?
I think so, yes. I think it will become, I mean, of course, we won't directly move from jet fuel to hydrogen fuel right away. It's going to be a slow transition where you, just like cars, where you would have a hybrid and then you would move on to a completely hydrogen powered engine. The only thing that I would be concerned of is the storage because hydrogen is a gas and it would have to be liquefied. And then after liquefaction, it would have to be stored at very, very low temperatures. So that's going to be my concern is how they're going to do, how they're going to manage to store the fuel. But other than that, if it becomes possible, it's going to be definitely environmental friendly. And I think, well, of course, it will happen. again, human, I mean, mankind is moving technologically so fast. Can
Yeah.
happen in the next 6, 7 years or so that we'll have hydrogen powered engines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. And so, supersonic travel is also like one other major feat of engineering. I was actually, so when I was coming back to Toronto, I saw the Concorde parked at Heathrow, and yeah, that was amazing to see. Like the being able to, it was parked at a distance, so I couldn't see it properly, but I was still very excited to see it. And now I think in the US there's like another company called Boom Supersonic, which is manufacturing
Yeah.
supersonic airplanes.
Hmm.
And you know, United has already purchased. I think United Airlines has purchased a few of them or purchased rights for them. And like, what would I think airlines need to do to kind of like promote supersonic travel? And as a pilot or an engineer, do you just think there are any safety concerns with regards to supersonic travel? Or
Yeah, I mean, the safety concerns is nothing different than what even a normal jet would have. So there's nothing different in that aspect. Uh, to promote it for the airlines, it will be mostly for business travelers because business travelers
yeah,
travel often and travel further places. So cutting down a distance by 1/4 or 1/5 is definitely going to help business travelers to do their
mm,
meetings or whatever, the things that they have to need to do for their businesses. And that's what the Concorde was also based on. But the problem was the fuel. Again, it's money.
yeah,
So it was
mm,
uh, if it's going to be expensive for the airline, it's going to be expensive for the passenger as well. So now,
mm,
if they're
mm,
developing more fuel efficient engines for a supersonic jet, it will definitely come back into the airspace. And
mm,
probably not so much helpful or not so much exciting for a normal tourist because I mean,
mm,
not really because once it comes out or when it comes out, it's going to be expensive to travel because it's going to cut down the
mm,
time from 1/4 to 1/5.
yeah,
So it's definitely going to be expensive, but it probably is tailored towards business travelers.
sure, sure. And so my final question for you is, what kind of advice would you want to give to people who are considering a career in aviation, or just student pilots who are just starting training, and or basically like what kind of advice would you give to your former self?
Well, for that matter, any career, I would say, just not
Mm,
aviation. Just hard work. There's no substitute to
yeah,
hard work.
mm,
Uh,
yeah,
Particularly aviation, it's such a field that see, in aviation, you don't call a person who teaches you, you don't call him or her a teacher, you call them an instructor because an
yeah,
instructor can only instruct you. They can give you a guidance, they can guide you towards the proper way or a proper channel. But it's hard to say that you are a teacher. You can teach a few things, but there should be self motivation towards your goal. So always be knowledge hungry. Always be reading and finding new stuff and refreshing all what you have learned in the past.
yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for your precious time. I'm sure, yeah, for pilots, time on the ground is very, very precious. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to conduct my first podcast. And yeah, I hope to hear from you in the future again. So,
Absolutely, most
yeah,
welcome having me on the show. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.